Thank you, Mr. McNamee. Happy Sabbath, everyone. It is a little gloomier, isn't it? But not in here, hopefully. Sorry, should I not have moved that? Okay. Brethren, I know there are a few of us here at Sabbath services who like to sing harmony during the hymns. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I know there are a few of us. And BJ, pardon me. And I always appreciate that when I'm sitting behind one of those people or standing next to one of those people. My wife also does that sometimes. It's very pleasant. It's very pleasing. Somebody who knows how to do that, and they sing that harmony, and you get to hear those notes combining in a way that's attractive. That's what I'd like to talk about today, brethren, for the first message, is harmony. If you look at the dictionary, Merriam-Webster, harmony is a combination of simultaneous musical notes in a chord. These notes are happening at the same time, and you put a few of those together, and they call that a chord. The second definition is a pleasing arrangement of parts. So it could refer to things that even aren't musical. There could be harmony, congruence between things that even aren't musical, but there's a harmony between them. Or it could, or something that's in agreement or in accord. For instance, I'm building a house right now. We just started a project in the historic district in Salem, and there's a house that's burned down and demolished, and then we're building a new house in its place. And boy, the pile of paperwork that is, building a new house in a historic neighborhood. What are you going to do? You can't build a historic home there. And they don't want us to build a home that imitates a historic home. They don't want it to look too historic, but they want it to be harmonious with the neighborhood. This is the kind of language that we're trying to work with. So that home needs to be in harmony with the neighborhood. It has to look like it fits. It has to add to the neighborhood and lift it up, not tear it down, right? When you drive by the home, you want to think, oh, that's nice. It feels good. Another definition of harmony is tranquility. Like we experienced a period of relative harmony, right? Peace and harmony, tranquility, which is interesting that it has all those definitions, because that same word, when you hear harmonies being sung, it can give you a feeling of tranquility, can't it? When you hear harmonies done well from special music or somewhere, you can feel that feeling of, oh, that is nice. It does something to you, right? And on the other hand, on the other side of the same coin, you don't have to have a degree in music theory to be able to tell when someone's harmonies are off, do you? Or if somebody's singing the wrong notes or singing out of key. You don't have to be very educated. It's just more of a feeling. It's just like nails on a chalkboard. It's this sound that makes your hair stand up if you have any, and it gives you these goosebumps. And you just think, oh, that sounds horrible. You want to run away. Everybody feels that. It's just natural. So the word harmony is not found in Scripture very often. That specific word, if you search for it in Scripture, you'll find, I found one instance in the ESV translation. I found one instance. I think it's Colossians 3:14, where the word unity is translated harmony. But what's interesting is the concept of harmony is found all throughout Scripture. All throughout Scripture, especially in Paul's writings. In Paul's writings, he uses the imagery of a body being tied together. And this body represents us. And it's knit together, it's bound together in unity, while having multiple different parts, many different parts, different purposes, different jobs. But it's knit together in unity, working harmoniously together. This concept of harmony is found all through the Scripture. That concept that Paul talks about, with that body being bound together in unity, it means that the body has the same goal. The overall body has the same goal, and all of its little parts are supporting each other, doing different types of work, different ministries, different gifts, but the same goal, moving in the same direction. And if all the parts of the body are healthy and functioning in their role, then they're all going to be working to it in harmony to move that body along, to move that body and help it to go where it wants to go and do what it needs to do, to give it the strength, right, that it needs to have. Your brain is working with your hands are working with your eyes are working with your feet, all working together so you can get to the mailbox and back, or so you can do whatever you're doing. So today I'd like to talk about that harmony in that context, comparing the harmony that we do know to the harmony that we're still in the process of learning. I know I am. I couldn't help but notice in some of the letters to the churches, Colossians and Ephesians. We're going to look at Colossians 3 and Ephesians 5. I couldn't help but notice in those sections of those letters this reoccurring theme. So both of these passages start, Colossians 3 and Ephesians 5, there's a passage in both of those where they start with being filled with the God's Spirit or having the mind of Christ. In fact, we can go ahead and turn over to Colossians 3. Let's go ahead and turn over there. Way back in the back, all the Ians, tiny little things. Colossians 3 and verse 12. So Colossians 3 and verse 12, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering, bearing with one another, forgiving one another. If anyone has a complaint against one another, even as Christ forgave you, you must also do. But above all these things, put on love, which is the bond of perfection. That's also translated the bond of unity. In the ESV, I'm pretty sure. And let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to which you are also called in one body. And let the word of Christ dwell richly in you, with all wisdom, teaching, and admonishing. So notice right there in verse 15, and let the bond of perfection, let the peace of God rule in your hearts. So there's the peace of God in our hearts. And then, just right after that, he says in verse 16, he says, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Peace of God in our hearts, word of Christ dwelling in us. Okay, now let's go to Ephesians 5. You can keep your place there in Colossians if you have a ribbon that's free in Colossians 3. We're going to go to Ephesians 5. Ephesians 5 and verse 18. I think it's the second half of verse 18. Yeah. Ephesians 5, verse 18. Do not be drunk with wine, in which is dissipation, but, here we go, check this out, but be filled with the Spirit. Okay, so in both of them, we're talking about God's Spirit being in us. Mind of Christ being in us, God being in us, His Spirit being in us. And then, so both of these passages kind of start with that. And both of these passages end with this long list of practical application. How do we use that in our everyday lives? How to treat our wives and children? You know the passages in Ephesians 5, right? You can go right on through. If you look, we're already there. If you look on down, you can see let's start in verse 22, my personal favorite. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. I'm just kidding. That was a joke. For the husband is head of the wife, as so is Christ is head of the church. But he goes on and on. That's not it. And he says, in verse 24, therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so far the wives to their own husbands and everything. And he goes on, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. He goes on and on talking about how to deal with our children, how to talk to each other, how to deal with our families. So the interesting thing is the same thing can be found in Colossians 3, the same sort of thing where there's, a list of do's and don'ts. Don't fall into these traps and do these things. What I found catching was that Both these passages start with being filled with the Spirit, and they end with practical application, and there's something in between those two things in both these passages. What do you think it is? It's singing. It's singing. It's being filled with songs. Let's look at it. We're already in Ephesians, so let's look. We started in verse 18, the last half. Be filled with the Spirit. In Ephesians 5, verse 19, he says, speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord, giving thanks always for all the things to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, submitting to one another in the fear of God. Notice the singing. I feel like we skip over that quite often. I know I do. Okay, yeah. They were into a lot of singing back then, I guess. But I find it interesting. Let's look back over to Colossians. Colossians 3. And we started in verse 12. But let's go on down to verse 16, pick up where we left off, Colossians 3:16. Let the word of Christ dwell richly in you in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. I don't think I have ever done that once in my life. Teaching and admonishing each other in songs. What if I came up to my friend over there, Caleb, and I said, Caleb, I have a singing telegram from the Lord. I hereby declare that you should not wear that suit. Whatever, I don't know. What do we do? How do we admonish each other in songs and hymns? What in the world is this talking about? So, I'm taking a little stab at it today. I'm not going to do any more singing. But we're going to just use this principle, this idea of harmonies, and see if we can learn something from that. We're going to look into that. So what's interesting, again, to me, both of these passages here, Colossians and Ephesians, they start with being in harmony with God. They end in being in harmony with our families and our co-workers and our bosses, all these principles for how to live. And in the middle, it talks about singing, which in singing, there's actual harmonies. There's melodies and harmonies, and you have to pay attention to those things. So we're going to talk about that. I think this concept of harmony is important to understand, understanding unity. Again, in the ESV, that word unity is translated as harmony. And if you think of unity in that way, as harmony, I feel like it's so much easier to understand. You know, when we come here, there's a reason that we don't just have a book of chants. You know, we're not putting all the words on the screen and we're not all just chanting together the same words, our Father which art in. No, we don't quite do it that way. There are some churches who do. I remember visiting a church when I was young, and I was strange right when I walked in the door because I was the only one dressed up. And then I had my briefcase. Nobody else had a briefcase. They probably all thought I was carrying a bomb. I was visiting a church of a friend, a regular church. I think it was a Lutheran church. And I sat down, and I remember looking around, and nobody had a Bible. And I thought, strange. And they sprinkled some water on some people. And then they got out these weird books out of the back of the row, and everyone started chanting. And they all knew the program except me. And I'm like looking at this, and everybody's chanting at the same time. And it was really kind of creepy. Okay, that was a sidetrack. But we don't do that here. Why not? Why not? Instead, we are trying to make some harmony here. Some harmony. We're not all saying the exact same thing in unison, but let's imagine we're in a choir. When you're in a choir, there are different parts of the choir. There are basses and there are sopranos. There are different gifts, but the same goal. It's to edify that choir and the people listening. It's to build up the body. So harmony doesn't require duplication and copycatting of your neighbor. You don't look at your neighbor's Facebook and say, I need to be exactly like that. You don't listen to your neighbor and say, I need to say exactly the same words he said. That's not the point here. Harmony is more about finding the parts that we can sing in our range that fits with the overall song. And to do that, we're going to talk about 3 categories. One is the notes. We're not singing the same notes, but we're singing compatible notes. Our notes that we're singing must be compatible with everyone else's. So the first one is notes. The second one is volume. We have to be singing compatible volume levels, says the loudest guy in the room, right? Actually, I might not be the loudest, but I'm pretty close. The third thing is compatible timing. Our timing needs to be compatible. So our notes, our volume, and our timing should all be compatible. And if we do that, we will experience harmony. So first we're going to talk about notes. If we're all singing, let's say we're singing in a choir again, we need to be singing in the same key. The same key. Have you ever, I want to know if anybody else has ever done this. So there's been times when I'm in my car or my truck and the radio is on, but it's turned way down. And I hear a song that I know and I immediately start singing along. And then I'm like, oh, I like that. And I'm singing and I turn it up. And as I turn it up, I realize I'm singing it in the wrong key. And it's the weirdest feeling. It's like, oh, I get this feeling like I'm off, right? And I just turned it up and then I could hear and then I realized I was wrong. Anybody ever done that? Is that just me? One? Okay, we got a few. So in order to sing in the right key, you have to be able to hear. You have to be able to listen, right? You have to be able to clearly hear what's being sung. That's one part of it. One more story. So I remember coming through choir directors and different people who have helped me out along the years and told me how to do it better, how to learn parts better, how to sing and how to be better part of a choir. And one of the biggest principles is that even when you don't know your part, even when you're unsure and you think you're probably wrong, you're supposed to sing up and sing out. You're supposed to sing loud in choir practice, even when you think you're going to be wrong. Why? So they can hear it. So they can hear, oh, that's not quite the right note. Let's get Matt on the right note, and then we'll be okay for the performance. If you sing loud in practice around the people you're comfortable with, and you're wrong, that doesn't feel good. But it's better to do that than to wait until the performance, right? And I think that my natural proclivity is if I don't know the notes very well, I'll just keep kind of quiet during practice and I'm trying to pick them up, but maybe I don't quite know. And then we get to the performance and surprise, surprise, they put the mic right in front of me and I don't know it. So it's better to sing out even if you don't know it. But in order to sing out like that, it takes some vulnerability, doesn't it? Have you ever come to one of your fellow church members and just said, I just don't know the notes here. I just don't know. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how I'm supposed to get through this. I just don't know. I'm just going to say that out loud. Maybe you can help me with that, right? Before we take the big test. And we need to have that kind of vulnerability with each other. So this is like a big choir practice here. And when we come, if there's something we're unsure about and we don't know, this is the place we ought to be able to sing out a little louder, even if it's kind of off. And hopefully our family would not just give us the stink eyebrow, of like, ugh, he's off, you can hear it. And everybody points and laughs. No, instead, we should say, yeah, I think you're a little flat on that one. Maybe you need to, let me show you what it looks like. But that takes vulnerability. It takes a certain amount of freedom, right? And a certain amount of judgment and courage. And it's difficult to help somebody find the right note when they're having trouble hearing it. So the way you tell somebody about that matters too. If you just come and say, that note is totally wrong, they might not take it quite as well. I remember one time, I think it's a few years back now, when my wife and I were practicing this new technique that we heard about. We were practicing in our marriage, this conversation technique, okay? We're practicing this communication technique we had just learned about. And it's this technique where you're supposed to, basically you're supposed to repeat back what the person said and things like that. And I remember she called me out about something. I don't remember the exact thing, but she called me out about it, and she was very brave and fun and bold and courageous. She stepped out and she said, you know, I want you to do this thing, or I don't want you to, I forget what it was. She told me how she wanted it to be, you know. And I just didn't like that. I didn't like that feeling of being corrected. And I remember thinking, well, if you would just say it in a different way, maybe I would be able to hear it, you know? And so I told her, I was like, yeah, I don't like the way you said it. It's not that you said it, it's the way you said it. And I told her that. And then she said, well, how am I supposed to say it? And then I turned and I quickly thought of the way that I might like to hear it. And I said it to her, and she said, that's exactly what I said. And then I was like, oh yeah, you're right about that. My bad. And so my point with that is, sometimes it doesn't matter how it's said. It doesn't really feel good to be told that you're singing the wrong notes, does it? But that's what we have to practice doing. That's what you got to do in a choir if you're ever going to get any better. You got to be able to tell your neighbor, hey, that's a little flat, that's a little sharp, and it stings a little to hear that, but then you move on. So you got to be, your notes have to be compatible. The next thing is your volume levels. Your volume levels have to be compatible. I'm in a band with a few of the guys here, as some of you may know. We just got in-ear monitors for our band, and it is amazing. We can all of a sudden hear when someone's pedal was left on, or when someone's playing the wrong notes, or when someone's singing the wrong notes. Because why? Because all of our sounds are being pumped directly into everyone's ear holes, which is, instead of this big muddled garble of sound into the room, and you're just hearing kind of like a vague remnant of what you sound like. No, it's clear as a bell. And someone comes on the mic and starts singing a harmony, and they're off, they can hear it. And it's like, oh. If I come on and start playing a harmonica solo, and I'm off, I'm like, oh. Or whatever it is. But volume levels are very important when you're in a choir. And I would say the point to take away here from this analogy is that we all need to be heard. Whether you're in your family, your church congregation, or at your workplace, we need to be heard. We need to be heard, and they do too. Everybody does. If there's one person that's constantly just so loud that no one else can say a thing, that does not make a very good special music piece, right? There's supposed to be a harmony there, blending. But person A is so loud that person B can't be picked up on the microphone, right? And so I remember even first being in choir and singing too loud. And I remember a very diplomatic person that came and told me, you know, the whole idea here is to blend with your whole tenor section. And I'm like, oh, what is blend? I've never heard that word. What is this blend? So sing a little quieter, so that everyone can be heard together. And sometimes that's what it takes when you're trying to make harmony, when you're trying to live in harmony, is you got to just quieten yourself down a little, some of the louder ones of us. And some of the quieter ones of us, maybe we need to learn to project a little more, or at least use the microphone properly. You know what I mean? We all have work to do there. I remember a sort of embarrassing story about myself when I was growing up. I used to mow the grass. At some point, that became my job, is to mow the grass on my riding lawnmower. We lived in the country, and we had this Murray riding lawnmower that we got. It was amazing, and I could ride around on that thing and mow the grass. Well, I had a Discman that I would put my CDs in and listen to while I'm riding on the lawnmower. Very bumpy yard. Good thing I had skip protection on my Discman. And then to listen to that music, we didn't have earbuds back then, because the only earbuds were horrible. It was like those earbuds you get off the Delta flight when you forget your earbuds. They're just like a hard piece of plastic. Feels like sticking a rock in your ear. So instead we had earphones, which were way better. They were like a metal band across the top of your head with two plastic speakers mounted on them. and a thin layer of foam that like disintegrated when it saw sunlight. So I was wearing those, listening to Mariah Carey or Whitney Houston or something, singing at the top of my lungs on my lawnmower, driving around bouncing around in my bumpy yard, just singing. And then I got off my lawnmower, turned it off, and I realized there were people watching. I could be heard all through the canyon singing, because my lawnmower, I couldn't hear myself, but that didn't mean nobody else could hear me. So I realized that, I'm going to be heard. Anyway, volume levels are important. And you got to be able to hear yourself. You got to be able to hear others. James says, James 1:16, he says, be quick to listen and slow to speak. He says, be quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to anger. So we ought to be quick to listen in our families, in our homes. Why? Because in order to live in harmony, everyone needs to be able to hear themselves and to be heard, both. The last thing is timing. We have to have timing that is compatible. Again, not exactly the same. When we sing a choir piece, you'll notice that the different parts of the different groups, their mouths are moving at different times. They have different parts at different times. They're not all chanting the same words at the same time. They're not all singing in perfect unison. We're not doing the chant thing here. That's weird. But their timing is compatible. It's compatible, right? Let's turn over to Matthew 20. Matthew 20. When we come together, we don't just all say the same words. It wouldn't be edifying. We don't just copy what someone else says in a conversation. By the way, if someone were to do that to you, would you feel heard? If you came up to them and you said, how are you doing today? And they said, how are you doing today? Would you feel like they're hearing you or listening to you, or would you feel like you're being mocked, We don't just parrot back exactly what we hear. No, it's much more of a harmonious flow to it, right? So Matthew 20, I didn't turn there myself. While we're going there, syncopation is okay, brethren. There are times when people will drop out, when people will come back in with their parts, and that's okay. Matthew 20 and verse 1. When I read that, I read, for the kingdom of heaven is like a lawnmower. No, it doesn't say lawnmower. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. When he had agreed with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them to his vineyard. And he went about the third hour, saw others standing in the marketplace. He said to them, hey, you also go into the vineyard. And whatever's right, I'll give you. So they went, and again he went out about the 6th hour and the 9th hour and did likewise. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing idle. And he said to them, why have you been standing there idle all day? And they said, because no one hired us. And he said, you also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right you will receive. So when evening had come, the owner of the vineyard said to his steward, call the laborers, give them their wages, beginning with the last to the first. And when those who were hired about the 11th hour came, they received each a denarius. But when the first came, they supposed they would receive more, and they likewise received each a denarius. Notice in this parable that all of these workers worked for different amounts of time, different times in the day. Some didn't start until way later in the song, so to speak. Their part wasn't until the end. But they did it, and they all did it together with the same goal, in the same field, working the same harvest for the same owner, right? It's okay if our timing is different as long as it's compatible. As long as we're working toward the same goal, we don't all have to be doing exactly the same thing at exactly the same time. Brethren, if we learn to sing harmony in this way, as families, as a church congregation, as a whole church body, we can have an amazing effect on the people around us. Sort of like I talked about with you don't have to have a music degree to know when someone's singing off key. If you think about that in terms of preaching the gospel, how are we preaching the gospel? Are we all singing on key? Are we singing in the same key with compatible timing? And are our volumes about right? Or are we singing in a way that scares people away? If we view through this lens of harmony, all doing slightly different things, but with the same goal, I think it's helpful not only at home, but to draw closer to God and also to preach His word. Harmony is attractive. One last thing is I met my wife because of harmony. If it weren't for harmony, I would probably not be right here today. I'd be confused and wandering across the eastern landscape somewhere. We were in Cincinnati. I was there for ABC, and there was this big ice storm, this big power outage. So the power went out, and all the freezers turned off, and we thought, we need to cook all of our meat right now. That was the only logical thing to do. So we got charcoal, barbecues, and we took all the meat out of the freezers, and we started cooking it in the yard. And my radio on my truck I had turned on. We were playing the radio, and we're cooking this stuff. And I remember several people there from ABC, and I heard this voice singing along to the radio, but singing, not just singing the melody like I always do, singing the harmony. And I was like, what? Who is that? And I couldn't see her. Who is that? I'm looking around, and then I saw her. There she was. And I was like, oh, I think I need to talk to her, And I think maybe there was something subconscious about that. I thought, I think I need that in my life. Why? Because harmony makes the singer sound better. Harmony fills up the melody in a way that adds to it, right? Harmony, you put another singer in the song, but you don't overpower, you don't detract from the melody. It only adds to. And I needed to be added to. I needed that. You add a whole nother set of notes, but you increase the production value of the song. And so if she had been singing off key, we wouldn't be married. I mean, that's the way it is. I wouldn't have noticed, and I would have, whatever. I don't know what would have happened. Who knows? Choose your own adventure. But that was it. That was the beginning for me that really sent us down that road, So again, what does this say about us as a church preaching the gospel to those who will hear? Does our preaching sound harmonious? Does it make people stop and think, ooh, that sounds like it fits with the word. It sounds like it flows right with it. Oh, and it highlights it. It doesn't detract from it. That's what we need to be. Singing notes that are compatible with volume that's compatible and timing that's compatible. If we can take Paul's advice in Colossians 3 and Ephesians 5, if we can take that advice, be filled with God's Spirit, putting on that mind of Christ, be so full of joy that we're singing hymns to each other, we're not quite there. We're getting there. I can see it one of these days. Even if metaphorically, singing hymns to each other, living in harmony with our families and congregations, brethren, that's the goal. If we can look at life through this lens, even though we may be singing different parts at different times with different volume levels, there is a way for us all to be in harmony, and that's what we're shooting for.